I was the only one who stood by my grandpa. Now my family is furious he left me everything. I never expected love to turn into war, but when my grandfather's will was read, my family's indifference curdled into rage, their apathy igniting into something vicious, something grasping, something that made me realize they had never truly cared about him, about me, about anything beyond their own entitlement. They had ignored him for years, and now that he was gone, they came crawling, clawing, demanding their fair share of a man they had barely acknowledged when he was still breathing. And I was supposed to feel guilty for being the only one who had loved him? The lawyer's office smelled of leather and paper, the air thick with dust and self-righteous indignation. I sat in the chair closest to the desk, my hands clenched in my lap, while the rest of my family, if I could even call them that, crowded the room with their hushed whispers and sideways glances. They were expecting their payday. My mother, Meredith, perched on the edge of her seat, arms crossed so tightly over her chest that the veins in her hands stood out like the roots of an old tree. She had never been a warm woman, but now there was something sharp in her gaze, a thinly veiled expectation, as if she already knew she was about to receive what was rightfully hers. My uncle Robert lounged back, legs spread wide, looking as though he had better places to be, barely suppressing a yawn. His wife, Elaine, kept checking her phone, tapping her manicured nails against the screen in an impatient rhythm. My cousins, David and Lauren, whispered behind their hands, exchanging smug looks, already making plans for the inheritance they were convinced was about to rain down upon them. They had all come, not for the man who had raised them, but for his money. And then there was me, the only one who had been there, the only one who had seen my grandfather in his weakest moments, who had sat by his bedside when he had been too frail to move, who had made sure he never spent a single holiday alone, the only one who had listened to his stories, learned his habits, knew what made him laugh, what made him sigh, what made him him. The lawyer, a solemn man with gray at his temples and tired eyes, cleared his throat, drawing all attention back to the document in his hands. Let's begin. The room tensed. My grandfather, William Harrington, was not a man of half measures. When he loved deeply. When he gave everything. But he had also been a man who believed in actions over words, in loyalty over blood, in the kind of devotion that had to be proven, not merely claimed. And now, in his absence, his final decision would prove just how much he had seen. The lawyer's voice was steady as he read the will aloud, his tone detached, unaffected. To my daughter, Meredith. My mother straightened in her seat. I leave the memories of the father she once had. A sharp inhale, a stunned silence. Her lips parted as if about to protest, but the lawyer was already moving on. To my son, Robert, and his wife, Elaine. Robert's lazy smirk faltered, his posture stiffening. Elaine glanced up from her phone, suddenly interested. I leave the knowledge that they have built their own success, independent of me, and thus have no need of my financial support. A strangled sound came from Robert's throat. To my grandchildren, David and Lauren. The whispering ceased. They sat straighter. I leave them the opportunity to reflect on the time they could have spent with their grandfather, rather than waiting for his wealth to benefit them. David made a noise of protest, while Lauren turned red, her hands gripping the arms of her chair. And then, silence. A heavy, suffocating pause. My heart was a drum in my chest. I had expected something. But even now, as the words hung in the air, I couldn't breathe. To my beloved grandchild, the only one who stood by me, a ripple of disbelief. I leave everything. The room erupted. It was chaos, a cacophony of outrage, of voices overlapping, of accusations slicing through the air like blades. My mother shot to her feet, hands trembling, her carefully maintained composure fracturing before my eyes. "This is a joke," she snapped, turning on the lawyer as if he had personally written the will just to spite her. "There must be some kind of mistake. My father wouldn't—" "He did," the lawyer said simply. Robert's chair scraped against the floor as he pushed up, face flushed with anger. "This is bullshit. That money, that estate, everything belongs to all of us. You can't just cut us out." Lauren, usually so polished, was shaking. "What kind of brainwashing did you pull, huh?" She turned to me, eyes blazing with accusation. "What did you do?" You must have manipulated him." "I didn't do anything," I said, my voice steady despite the storm around me. "I was just there." The words hit like a slap, because that was the truth, wasn't it? I had simply been there. When my grandfather had fallen and needed someone to help him up, I had been there. When he had grown sick and needed someone to take him to the doctor, I had been there. When he had sat alone in his study, the weight of old age pressing down on him like a slow, inevitable collapse, I had been there. And they hadn't. They had been too busy, too absorbed in their own lives, too indifferent to the man who had given them everything, who had loved them despite their neglect. And now they were livid that he had finally seen them for who they truly were. "How dare you!" my mother seethed, stepping closer. There was something unhinged in her expression, a mask finally slipping. "He was my father. You think you deserved this more than me?" "You didn't even visit him," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "You didn't even call." A muscle in her jaw twitched. "You think you're better than us?" Robert sneered. "That you're some kind of saint?" "No," I said. "I just cared." That was the difference. That was the divide they would never cross. And deep down, they knew it. But the truth wasn't enough for them. They wanted more. They wanted what they hadn't earned, and they would fight me for it. I wasn't naive. I knew this wouldn't end here. My family was like vultures. They wouldn't leave just because the feast had been denied. No, they would circle, they would screech, they would demand. They would take me to court if they had to. But as I sat there, surrounded by their fury, I realized something. I wasn't afraid, because for once, I held the power, and I had a choice to make. Would I share? Would I let them in, despite everything? Would I show them the generosity they had never shown him? Or would I let them reap what they had sown? And just when I thought I knew what I was going to do, the lawyer cleared his throat one last time. "There's one more thing." The room stilled. A hidden truth was about to come to light, and I had no idea just how deep the betrayal went. The air in the lawyer's office was heavy with unspoken words, thick with resentment so dense it felt like something alive, writhing between us. The tension clung to my skin, wrapping around my throat like an unseen hand, but I refused to be the first to break. I sat there, silent, unmoving, while my so-called family let their fury settle into something more dangerous, calculated anger. And then the lawyer spoke again. "There's one more thing." The words fell like a hammer, silencing the room. I saw the flicker of something in my mother's eyes. Hope, desperation, an expectation that maybe, just maybe, the will hadn't been as final as it seemed. That perhaps there was a clause, an amendment, some loophole that would grant them even a sliver of what they had come here for. But I wasn't stupid. I could see the way the lawyer's fingers tightened around the document, how his gaze flickered from me to the others before settling on me once more. Whatever came next, it wasn't going to be some simple addendum. "Before his passing," the lawyer continued, his voice carefully neutral, "Mr. Harrington requested that I disclose additional information only after the will was read in full." He adjusted his glasses, cleared his throat. "It concerns why he made this decision." A beat of silence. Then my uncle scoffed. "We already know why. He was old. He was sick. He was being influenced." "Shut up, Robert!" my mother snapped, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. Her fingers curled into fists against her lap, her nails digging into her palm. "Let him finish." The lawyer didn't acknowledge their exchange. Instead, he reached into his briefcase, pulling out a thick, cream-colored envelope, its edges crisp, untouched. "This," he said, holding it up for all to see, "was written by your father before his health declined. He wanted it read only in the event that anyone questioned his decision. He didn't have to say it. We all knew why it was necessary." I swallowed hard, feeling the weight of the envelope before it was even in my hands. This was my grandfather speaking from beyond the grave, a voice that could not be interrupted, could not be denied, could not be twisted to suit anyone's narrative but his own. The lawyer broke the seal, and then, in a voice firm and unwavering, he began to read. "If you are hearing this, it means I am gone. It means my decision has been questioned, perhaps even challenged. And I expected that. I knew, even before the ink dried on this will, that my family would feel wronged. They always have. They have always believed they were owed something, that my love was a currency to be collected, that my wealth was their birthright. And yet, where were they? I will tell you where they were. Too busy, too preoccupied, too disinterested in a man who had spent his life providing for them. They only called when they needed something. They only visited when it was convenient. And as the years passed, they forgot me. Not entirely, of course. They remembered my money, my estate, my name. But me, the man, the father, the grandfather, no. That part of me was left to rot in the corners of their minds, gathering dust like an old book they had long since lost interest in, except for one. To my grandchild, the only one who stood by me, I hope you never doubt why I made this decision. You did not have to take care of me. You did not have to visit, to call, to be there. But you did. Not out of obligation, not out of expectation, but because you wanted to, because you cared. And that is something money cannot buy. That is something no will can ever measure. But I have done my best to repay it in the only way I know how. And if the rest of my family is angry, let them be. Their anger is not my concern. Their entitlement is not my burden. I spent my whole life giving them everything, and they still wanted more. But you never asked for anything, and that is why I leave it all to you. Let them be furious. Let them call you names. Let them claim I was manipulated. It will not change the truth. I made my choice, and I do not regret it. The words settled like an earthquake, shaking the very foundation of the room. No one spoke. No one breathed. It was like the air had been sucked from the office, leaving behind nothing but the raw, exposed nerves of people who had just been forced to see themselves for what they truly were. For once, my mother had no rebuttal. Her lips were slightly parted, her eyes locked on some unseen point in the distance, as if replaying every moment she had let slip by, every call she had ignored, every visit she had deemed unnecessary. Robert looked like he had swallowed glass. David and Lauren were pale, their hands clenched tightly together, as if hoping that if they held on hard enough, they could keep reality from shattering around them. Elaine, ever the silent observer, exhaled slowly, almost as if she had expected this. But expectation didn't make it hurt less. And me? I felt vindicated. The weight of years of watching my grandfather be ignored, of standing by his side while the rest of them lived their lives as if he were already dead, finally lifted. This wasn't just about the money. This was about justice, about a man who had refused to let his love be exploited any longer. And they hated it. They hated that they had lost, not because I had tricked him, not because of some legal technicality, but because of their own choices, because he had seen them for who they truly were, and they could never undo that. The silence didn't last long. It never does. My mother was the first to snap, her voice a brittle thing, raw and desperate. "This isn't fair," she hissed, turning on me with an expression so venomous it was almost unrecognizable. "You had no right." "No right?" I repeated, standing up so fast the chair scraped loudly against the floor. My own anger, so long buried beneath quiet patience, finally cracked through. "I had every right. I was there, Mom. Where were you?" Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. Nothing came out. "You all left him," I said, my voice rising, my chest heaving with the force of years of frustration finally surfacing. "You abandoned him, and now you want to act like you cared?" I laughed, the sound sharp, bitter. "You cared about his money, not him, and he knew it." Robert slammed his fist against the desk. "You think you're better than us?" "No," I shot back. "But I was better to him than any of you ever were." Their faces twisted with ugly, bitter fury, and I let them stew in it. I didn't care what they thought. I was the one with the power, and I wasn't about to let it go. The room felt suffocating, thick with the stench of betrayal, greed, and bitter regret. No one spoke, not for several agonizing seconds after the lawyer finished reading my grandfather's letter. It was as though his voice had carved the very air apart, leaving behind nothing but the raw, undeniable truth. The truth that they had all abandoned him, that they had all lost him long before he had ever written that will. And the worst part? They knew it. Oh, they knew. It was written in the way my mother's lips trembled as she struggled to form a rebuttal that wouldn't sound hollow. in the way Robert clenched his fists so tightly his knuckles went white, like he could somehow hold on to his shattered pride. In the way David and Lauren looked anywhere but at me, their faces pale with the realization that their so-called inheritance had slipped right through their fingers, lost not to trickery, not to deceit, but to something far more damning, their own neglect. Yet despite all of that, despite the irrefutable proof of my grandfather's intentions, they still refused to accept it. My mother recovered first. She smoothed a trembling hand over her hair, inhaled sharply, and turned to me with forced composure. "Listen," she said, her voice softer now, calculated. "I understand that you were close to him. No one is denying that." I almost laughed. No one is denying that? She had spent the last 10 minutes calling me a manipulative liar, but now she was trying to pretend like she was the reasonable one? "But," she continued, "this isn't just about you. This is about family. You can't seriously think it's fair for you to keep everything while the rest of us get nothing." "Why not?" I asked, tilting my head. Her mask slipped for a fraction of a second, revealing the naked rage simmering beneath her skin. "Because we're his family too," she snapped. "No, you were his blood," I corrected. "But family? You stopped being that a long time ago." Her nostrils flared. Elaine, always the quiet one, finally spoke. "Look," she said, folding her hands neatly in her lap, her tone measured. "No one is saying you have to give up everything, but surely you can see why it would be right to share. We can go to court if we have to, challenge the will." "You won't win," the lawyer cut in smoothly. Mr. Harrington was of sound mind when he made these decisions, and as you've heard in his letter, he anticipated this reaction. Any challenge would be a waste of time and money. Robert exhaled through his nose like a furious bull. "So that's it? We're just supposed to accept this?" "Yes," I said simply. Lauren scoffed. "Oh, come on. You can't be this selfish. He was our grandfather, too." "You're telling me you're really going to keep every last dime?" "Yes," I said again. And this time, I smiled. A real smile. A victorious one. Because why shouldn't I? Why should I reward them for abandoning him? Why should I validate their greed? Why should I let them pretend they deserved something they never earned? I owed them nothing, and I was done pretending otherwise. Lauren's face twisted with anger. "You're insane," she spat, her voice raw with frustration. "Maybe," I said, shrugging, "but I was the only one who loved him, and that's why he left me everything." Silence. Heavy, bitter, defeated. They had lost, and they knew it. They didn't leave quietly. Robert stormed out first, muttering under his breath about lawsuits, about how he'd find a way to get his rightful share. But I saw the truth in his eyes. He knew it was over. My mother lingered for a moment longer, as if searching for the right words to change my mind. But in the end, she just scoffed, turned on her heel, and followed after Robert. Lauren and David, unwilling to accept defeat with grace, made a dramatic show of their anger. "You'll regret this," David sneered. "No," I said, "I won't." And with that, they were gone. The lawyer sighed, rubbing his temples. "Well," he said, giving me a tired but knowing look, "that went about as well as expected." I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. "It's over then?" He smiled slightly. "For now." I nodded, standing up from my chair. I had expected to feel something, guilt, sadness, even a sliver of doubt, but I felt light, free, and long time I knew that I had made the right choice. I turned to the lawyer one last time. "So, what happens next?" He closed his briefcase with a soft click and looked at me with quiet amusement. "Whatever you want." I could, because I was the only one who stood by my grandfather.